forecast. Bye-bye.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. It's turned into a sunny day across southern parts of the UK with cloudier conditions further north. And aside from a few showers, most places are dry. That's because a very large anticyclone is sitting in the mid-Atlantic. It's blocking any considerable areas of low pressure or weather fronts from coming our way. But a weak front has introduced some cloud to Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England, 1 or 2 showers as well. However, even here, the cloud will tend to thin and break overnight, especially for Northern England, southern and eastern Scotland, some clear spells developing. Further south, widely clear spells across the rest of England as well as Wales, but despite the clear skies, temperatures not dropping far. Thicker cloud affecting the north and northwest of Scotland once again, along with a keen breeze. But although it will be cloudy for Northern Ireland, the skies will brighten by the afternoon, and a much sunnier day for eastern Scotland, for much of northern England as well, and temperatures respond as a result up into the mid-20s here, whilst 26 to 28 is possible further south for much of central and southern England as well as South Wales. Now, through Wednesday evening, we'll see clear spells remain for the vast majority, but again, some thicker cloud for western and northern Scotland, some outbreaks of light rain and drizzle here. Northern Ireland also largely cloudy, but it's a warm night in places, a muggy night for some. 16 Celsius for Southampton, London, and I think mid-teens for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Now, for Scotland, once again, western areas seeing the cloud and those outbreaks of light rain during Thursday. But further south, plenty of sunshine before some heavy showers start to emerge in the far south by the afternoon. Showers develop more widely on Friday, along with much cooler air.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you. And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Very good afternoon and welcome to the briefing PM, an hour of the latest political news debate and analysis here on GB News. I'm Darren McCaffrey and here's what's coming up over the next hour. Summer of discontent. Rail strikes are gripping the country today. The government's at war with the unions and there are threats of more industrial action in schools and hospitals to come. We'll have the very latest from right across the country. We'll have reporters in different parts of the country talking about their gridlock positions, including Will Hollis, who's in the Midlands for us this afternoon. Also, everyone in the political world is blaming everyone else. And it wouldn't be a proper Westminster scrap without a fight within the Labour Party too, whether to support the strikers or not. And the Scottish Labour leader, Anna Sewell, defied Keir Starmer and joined a union protest. overreaction from MPs, MSPs and journalists. And as always, want to hear what you've got to say about this as too, particularly if you're affected by the rail strikes. Do get in touch. GBViews at gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me at GBNews. All that and lots more between now and 4. But first, at the top of the hour, we just need headlines.
Good afternoon. It's 3:01. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. Crisis talks were held during a cabinet meeting this morning as the worst rail strikes in more than 3 decades caused major travel chaos across the UK. With 80% of train services cancelled, Boris Johnson warned commuters they must stay the course in the face of what he's calling unnecessary aggravation. More walkouts are planned for Thursday and Saturday, but the knock-on effects will be felt all week. It's after last-minute talks failed to resolve a dispute between unions and rail bosses over pay, jobs and conditions.
We need the union barons to sit down with Network Rail and the train companies and get on with it. And we need, I'm afraid, everybody, and I say this to the country as a whole, we need to get ready to stay the course.
RMT General Secretary Mick Lynch says members will overcome whatever obstacles the government puts in their way.
This is a lawful dispute under the legislation that the Tories brought in themselves. And every time we meet the hurdles and break the thresholds that they brought in, they want to change the law again. We've got the most draconian laws in Western Europe and in any democracy, in fact, anti-trade union laws. Whatever they bring in, we'll meet that challenge and we'll continue to campaign. And if necessary, we'll take effective industrial action when we need to.
London Mayor Sadiq Khan says the government needs to take part in the negotiations.
The key thing is for the RMT to sit down with the government, the train companies, Network Rail, and resolve differences around a table rather than strikes. Nobody wants strikes. I don't want strikes. Londoners don't want strikes. And I'm speaking to workers, they don't want strikes either.
Well, people who need to travel today say they've been struggling with alternatives.
It's taken me the best part of 3 hours using 4 buses and a little bit of walking.
I haven't been able to get any trains to work. I've been on buses since about 6:30. They keep cancelling, keep driving past. It's impossible to get on them. They're all so packed. I've only literally just gotten to work now.
I want to use buses, but the queues for the buses are just way too much, yeah.
Unions have reacted with fury over a leaked memo which suggests Labour has banned its frontbenchers from picket lines. The head of the TSSA union described it as ridiculous nonsense by a party that was created by trade unions. Labour has declined to comment, although some MPs have joined demonstrations. Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Pat McFadden, didn't deny the claim.
I wasn't going to go to one anyway, to be honest, because what I want to see is a negotiated end to this dispute as quickly as possible, because this is obviously causing enormous inconvenience to the public today who need the railways for all sorts of reasons, work and many other reasons, and the sooner this comes to an end, the better.
The Scottish Labour leader, Anas Sarwar, has taken a different approach. He met striking workers on the picket line in Edinburgh and later tweeted of his solidarity with them. In other news, a man who murdered a couple in their home while their children slept upstairs has been jailed for life with a minimum term of 38 years. Stephen and Jennifer Chappell were both stabbed 6 times in November last year in Norton Fitzwarren near Taunton. Colin Reeves, who served in Afghanistan, launched the attack after a long-running dispute over parking. He killed the couple using a ceremonial dagger, which was given to him when he left the army. A fire in a residential high-rise building in West London is thought to have been started by someone charging an electric scooter in their flat. One person was taken to hospital suffering from smoke inhalation. 30 residents were evacuated from the building, and those who weren't directly affected were advised to stay in their flats. This resident says she had to alert her neighbours about what was happening.
In my flat, I saw that there was falling debris of flames, not flames, just debris. And then I looked down and saw all the fire brigade, but nobody called us. We had to go knocking to all the neighbours to pull them out because we wasn't made aware of it.
Crowds have returned to Stonehenge to mark the summer solstice for the first time in 2 years. The sun rose over the stones at around 10 to 5 this morning and won't set until almost 9:30 this evening, giving more than 16 and a half hours of daylight. The summer solstice has been celebrated at Stonehenge for thousands of years, with the stones framing the sun as it rises. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to the briefing with Darren.
Thank you very much. You're watching GB News, the briefing here on TV, online and on your wireless radio. It is 7 minutes past 3 o'clock on this Tuesday afternoon. Thank you very much indeed for your company. Now, many of you may be working from home today because a summer of discontent is well underway as the first of 3 national rail strikes began across the country, disrupting millions of people in what is the biggest industrial action on the train network this country has seen in 30 years or 3 decades. Huge swathes of Britain are affected, with many lines closed and many more operating a much more reduced service. Only 20% of trains are running after staff walked off the job at midnight last night, and many areas are without trains altogether. In London, the tube network is almost entirely out of service. The action by the RMT union is over pay and redundancies, and there are more strikes to come on Thursday and Saturday this week. Our Home Affairs editor, Mark White, has the very latest this afternoon.
At one of London's busiest train stations, it was anything but today. A largely empty concourse at Waterloo, indeed at stations right across the capital, as the vast majority of commuters clearly got the message that 80% of rail services are suspended.
It took me half an hour longer than normal. Right. Had to go via Norwood and then back into London Bridge.
I get it, especially after COVID. Like there needs to be some job increases. There needs to be maybe a bit of a pay rise, but if everyone's working from home, there's no real impact. Like I said, my train wasn't busy. We just got stuck outside.
At Birmingham New Street, passenger numbers there were a fraction of what would normally be seen on a weekday. This train to Northampton, one of a vastly reduced timetable of services to some key locations. In Scotland and Wales, the disruption has been even more severe. ScotRail say there are no services outside the central belt and only a handful of trains on the normally packed commuter services.
It actually works out a bit better, the times they've put on today, but it's very frustrating, the train strikes.
I was meant to be, I was going to go and work in the office. I still could, but I'll be honest, I'm just going to go and work from home instead of working in the office.
At Cabinet, the Prime Minister warned the public they must be prepared for more disruption.
We need to get ready to stay the course, because these reforms, these improvements in the way we run our railways are in the interest of the travelling public.
At Edinburgh's Waverley Station, the Scottish Labour leader Anna Sarwar defied Keir Starmer's edict that Labour politicians should not be seen with strikers on the picket line. Union bosses said the strike action was lawful and warned of further disruption.
We've got the most draconian laws in Western Europe and in any democracy, in fact, anti-trade union laws. Whatever they bring in, we'll meet that challenge and we'll continue to campaign, and if necessary, we'll take effective industrial action when we need to.
The Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury has urged the government to play a more active role in trying to bring about an end to the dispute.
If ministers simply stand back and say this is the wedge issue of the week, this is the issue upon which we can divide the country this week instead of something else, that is a lack of responsibility, it's a dereliction of duty, and we need better than that from the government.
Although many people opted to work from home today, others took to the roads for their daily commute. The M1 in County Durham, one of the routes busier than normal. With a tube strike in the capital adding to the misery, London buses have been busier than normal. The frustration obvious among those who weren't able to get on board. Large numbers of commuters, like me, opted for a taxi to work. although cab fares have been increased. With good weather forecast across the week, many others have taken the bike to work. The government says it's actively planning to change employment laws to allow for the likes of agency workers to step in future disputes. But that won't help with this current set of strikes, which are expected to cause travel chaos across the entire week. Mark White, GB News.
Well, this hour we're going to be right around the country. Let's start, first of all, though, in Nottingham and speak to Will Hollis today than they normally would be.
Good afternoon, Darren. Yeah, that's exactly what you would expect here at the brand new, newly opened about a week ago, Nottingham Broadmarsh bus station. National Express say they're expecting to see more customers coming through. I spoke to somebody yesterday who said they saw a significant increase in the amount of people that would go to National Express for this week of strikes. Usually so many people would take the train because, of course, it is a little bit quicker than any bus or coach service. But when the options now are greatly reduced for how you might be able to get to work or whatever it is you might be doing this week, of course, National Express and other bus and coach companies are going to be your natural next step. Now, they say that yesterday, around 85% of their services across the board, across the country, have already sold out. And while they say it's working hard to increase the number of services that are available, they simply cannot match the demand of Network Rail. The volume of buses and coaches just isn't there to meet in the same way. Now, one of the bits of advice, as you can quite expect for this sort of a period of time, is plan your journeys, get in and buy your tickets early, because with 85% of them already sold out for this week, a lot of people that might take a day or two and not really plan ahead will find themselves quite disappointed when they can't get a train to work or to that social event that they've really been looking forward to, and then they can't get a National Express or other coach service because they're all sold out. Now, we are at the bus station here. It's only 100 metres or so over to Nottingham train station, where RMT staff members as well as supporters have been picketing today. It seems to have quietened down a little bit. They've been out since this morning. As soon as we finished here, we'll go over and have a little bit of a look. It's also quiet today at Nottingham train station because they're only running about a service to big cities only every hour, so that's places like Leicester, like Derby, like Nottingham. Only 1 hour, one service every hour as well to London and to Sheffield along that London, Sheffield, Nottingham route, and they'll stop serving at 6:30. They start at
and we have lost Will who was joining us from the bus station in Nottingham, suggesting that the buses are pretty busy, pretty booked up for the rest of the week as people try to find alternative transport away from the rail network. How is this all affecting politics? What's the mood at Westminster? Let's bring in our political reporter, Catherine Foster, who joins us here in the studio. Catherine, thank you very much indeed for joining us. First of all, we heard from the Prime Minister today at Cabinet. It is interesting, isn't it, that he is suggesting and bracing people almost for these strikes to not just continue this week, but potentially well into the summer.
The government have taken a really very hands-off approach, haven't they? These strikes have been looming for a long time. They are saying it is not our job to intervene. This is a matter between the unions, between the union bosses, and they are urging restraint because, of course, the government are extremely worried that as inflation is rising, cost of living crisis, this could be only the very beginning. So if they're seen to give way with a big pay settlement on this, where does that lead? Already, teachers are going to get their pay offer tomorrow. They're already talking about striking. The same with nurses. Barristers have already balloted to strike. Those strikes are beginning next week. The government's very concerned about getting into this pay-wage spiral and that making things much worse. But, of course, the message that we've got to keep wages down is a hard one for people to take at the moment when everyone is worried about how to pay their bills.
Yeah, really fascinating to say, kind of for the wider economy, the government's message might be right. Clearly for individuals at the time when it's quite testing, it is difficult, isn't it, with the cost of living going up. In saying that, the government also looking at other things, aren't they? There's been much talk about this legislation to bring in agency workers.
Yes, they are. And that's now been confirmed. The Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, have said that they are going to go ahead with that. They're bringing in legislation this week to make it that agency workers can be brought in. Now, there was a ban on that dates back to, I think, 1973, Edward Heath's Conservative government, that they were worried that workers going in crossing picket lines might be attacked. That is going to be overturned by parliamentary mechanism called a statutory instrument. And then going forward, but that won't affect strikes in the very short term. That will come in from sort of mid-July. In the longer term, a Conservative manifesto promise was that a minimum level of service would be guaranteed. That will require much more stringent legislation, which will need to work its way through Parliament, which might be quite problematic and could take months. But they are determined to take a really firm line on this.
And what do we think the government's strategy is here? Because clearly at the moment they're kind of thinking and probably hoping that in the end the public will blame the unions for all the disruption. But could it get to the point, is it possible that actually the public, maybe later on this summer, as the disruption continues, will think that the government really does need to sort this out? Could it backfire, essentially, on the Prime Minister and the Transport Secretary?
I think it could. I mean, it's a big risk, isn't it, to sit so very obviously on the sidelines at the moment. This is happening on their watch. This is the worst national rail strike since 1989. It's happening under a Conservative government, even though they don't want to take any responsibility for that. So I think it is certainly problematic, and it'll be interesting to see. Labour also don't have a particularly easy time of it. They have been treading a tightrope, trying to be... They don't want to upset the unions. They don't want to upset workers by coming down too firmly on their side. They don't want to upset the travelling public. So they've been saying these strikes are regrettable. But there's a YouGov poll out today saying 40% of people don't know what the Labour position is. 28% of people think that they do support the strikes, and indeed there are splits now, despite what Keir Starmer said.
Well, maybe that ambiguity might help them in the end. Catherine, as always, thank you very much indeed. Catherine Forster joining us live in the studio with the latest political reaction. Coming up in just a couple of minutes, we'll have continuing coverage of the strikes across the UK, and we'll be looking in more detail about what the Labour Party's position is on all of this. Though there is one bit of good news today for the travelling public. It's the weather's pretty good across most of the UK. Let's get the details now from the Met Office.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. It's turned into a sunny day across southern parts of the UK with cloudier conditions further north. And aside from a few showers, most places are dry. That's because a very large anticyclone is sitting in the mid-Atlantic. It's blocking any considerable areas of low pressure or weather fronts from coming our way. But a weak front has introduced some cloud to Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England, 1 or 2 showers as well. However, even here, the cloud will tend to thin and break overnight, especially for northern England, southern and eastern Scotland, some clear spells developing. Further south, widely clear spells across the rest of England as well as Wales, but despite the clear skies, temperatures not dropping far. 13 or 14 Celsius in places. 11 for Stornoway, where it will be a damp and breezy start to the day on Wednesday, with thicker cloud affecting the north and northwest of Scotland once again, along with a keen breeze. But although it will be cloudy for Northern Ireland, the skies will brighten by the afternoon, and a much sunnier day for eastern Scotland, for much of northern England as well, and temperatures respond as a result up into the mid-20s here, whilst 26 to 28 is possible further south for much of central and southern England as well as South Wales. Now, through Wednesday evening, we'll see clear spells remain for the vast majority, but again, some thicker cloud for western and northern Scotland, some outbreaks of light rain and drizzle here. Northern Ireland also largely cloudy, but it's a warm night in places, a muggy night for some. 16 Celsius for Southampton, London, and I think mid-teens for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Now, for Scotland, once again, western areas seeing the cloud and those outbreaks of light rain during Thursday. But further south, plenty of sunshine before some heavy showers start to emerge in the far south by the afternoon. Showers develop more widely on Friday, along with much cooler air.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
Very welcome back. Now, the workers behind the country's transport gridlock today are members of the National Union of Rail, Maritime and Transport Workers. That's the RMT to you and me. And as we've heard, they're calling for a pay rise of at least 7%, but have been offered a maximum of 3%. They're also concerned about redundancies across the train network. Well, our reporter, Rosie Wright, is at London's King Cross for us. Good afternoon, Rosie. You've been speaking to the RMT today. They've been out picketing. What's the reaction from the unions?
They have been. Darren, a very good afternoon to you. I'm at sort of the intersection of St Pancras International, where lots of international tourists are arriving on the Eurostar, which is still running, and they then meet this very sort of confused picture because they can't get on the tube. You'll see that's closed behind me for today. And the trains, if they had other locations to get onto, it's going to be really difficult. St Pancras, for example, normally running about 25 trains an hour, now running more like 4 or 5. And one of the big questions is, why is this happening? If you wanted to go off to Edinburgh on the train today, well, the last train went from King's Cross at 2 o'clock. The picket line had sort of mixed reaction today, and it was quite a thin picket line at times. And at one point I said to them, you know, were you expecting a few more people? And the irony of that is that lots of people couldn't come out to help strike because of the strikes themselves. A few people driving past were in support early this morning and beeping their horns and clearly saying, look, we're with you. But one of the really big questions that commuters have here who've had to make different journeys or are working from home is, why are you doing this? Now, earlier, outside the picket line, I spoke to John Leach. He's the Assistant General Secretary of the RMT. They're the group that really have orchestrated this main set of strikes over the course of the next few days. I said, why are you doing this? And what would you say to those people who've been really inconvenienced by the strikes?
Yeah, well, obviously we regret the inconvenience that industrial action causes, but we're not going to beg for our members. We're a trade union. We've been around a long time. We take our responsibilities very seriously. Our members were their heroes They were called heroes when they kept Britain moving during the pandemic. And now we're being vilified for doing the most basic of things, which is standing up for ourselves, calling industrial action to fight for wages, cost of living in crisis, what I've just talked about, job security and protection against attacks on the threat of fire and rehire. Remember, we went through P&O and we're not going to let that happen again.
Just finally, lots of people will say, I support your right to strike, but could you not strike now?
Yeah, well, we understand the frustration, of course we do. But we are absolutely at the end of the road, and with £2 billion worth of cuts on the table, with a pay freeze for the last 2 to 3 years, and now one being basically put on the table going forward because it's so far behind inflation, we have no alternative, and we're not going to beg. Working class people right across the UK deserve a fair deal, and that includes RMT members.
So they say they're not begging, instead they're negotiating, and striking, therefore, is currently their very best strategy. I said this is a last chance, sort of your last straw strategy, and they said that's where we are. When pushed, Darren, I know you mentioned this on the introduction, I said what would get you round the table to say, OK, we won't need to strike anymore, because the RMT have said we could do this right up until Christmas and cause more disruption. They said 7%. If that was on the table, that might be what it would take to stop these strikes. In the meantime, of course, today has been significant disruption. There will be a more normal service tomorrow, but the overhang of the strikes today will cause disruption then. Thursday we see the same, and Saturday. So for lots of people, tourists arriving here, commuters, it's looking and thinking quite creatively. Do we make those journeys, or how can we do them instead without relying on the rails?
Rosie, as always, thank you very much indeed. Rosie's right there, joining us from King's Cross and Pancras in central London. Thank you, Rosie. Well, it wouldn't be a national crisis without, of course, a political row at Westminster and within the Labour Party itself, because the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has caused some controversy after demanding that his frontbench colleagues do not join the picket lines today, which seems to upset some of the party's left-wingers. Kate Osborne, the MP for Jarrow and an aide to Keir Starmer's frontbench, wasn't sitting on the fence. Here's what she had to say on Twitter.
I'm a trade unionist. I will always stand on the side of workers. Solidarity to the RMT.
Well, there you go. That's one Labour frontbencher. Let's bring in the former editor of Labour List, Peter Edwards, in on this discussion. Peter, as always, thank you. What do you make of Sir Keir's statement to his frontbenchers not to join the picket lines?
Well, it's understandable in the circumstances. Ultimately, the Labour stands up for working people, but that includes passengers as well as people that work on the railways. So it's fair that anyone that aspires to be Prime Minister attempts to speak for the whole country. But of course, I think both the Labour leadership and I have huge sympathy for rail workers on strike with that real terms pay cut. But it's right to ensure that you're talking to 50 million people across the UK. So, of course, there's a bit of an uneasy tension at the heart of it, as your introduction showed.
In saying that, how much impact are these rail strikes going to have? You know, we keep talking about the biggest for 30 years, don't we, Peter? But in the end, frankly, as the pandemic has shown, not everyone, of course, and there are millions of people who cannot do this, but there are also millions of others who can now work from home. There is that sense that the rail strike potentially wouldn't have had the same impact as it might have done in the past.
Well, I'm glad you say that. So nationwide, strike days are down by about 90% over 4 years. And of course, the trade unions, one of the challenges to trade unions is, why are you doing it now? And then they list a list of things that are inconvenience, whether it's getting to work or going to Glastonbury. And of course, you time a strike when it has some effect. But actually, and I'm a trade unionist, if you go on a strike as a last resort, but perhaps inconvenience a smaller number of people, that's actually one of the least worst outcomes. It's a bit more positive. And that's why I think some of the headlines, perhaps not with you, Darren, but on other stations about Britain grinding to a halt back to the 70s are unjustified. Just to finish on a stat, there are 33 million people in work in the United Kingdom, and about 250,000 couldn't get in today. So as you said, the level of disruption is significant, but modest.
Peter, you're going to start giving Simon Calder a run for his money with stats like that. In saying that, this is difficult, isn't it, for the Labour Party? And they still haven't kind of worked out a line on all of it. We're hearing from Catherine, our political reporter, earlier, I think 40% of people don't really know what Labour's position is on this. Is that helpful, or in the end, particularly if the industrial action continues on the railways, maybe spreads to teachers and to other people as well, nurses, barristers, that Labour, that line of trying to walk this tightrope is just not going to hold?
Well, actually, I think it could be vindicated. And if you walk through it, I think it's perfectly reasonable that Labour MPs in their constituency go and support striking workers. I would do the same. I think the Labour leadership shouldn't be out there with a fist raised on the picket line. That's not quite right. But as you said, there is industrial unrest across all sorts of professions, NHS, public sector, private sector. And I think perhaps with modest inconvenience in some cases, when we come to the general election, some of these things might be forgotten about. But what I really hope is remembered is across all the professions where there are real terms pay cuts, is that Labour stood up for working people. And as you said, if it's spreading into the NHS, if it's spreading into barristers, I hope that that's what voters will remember. This is very much not a class warfare. It's about standing up for ordinary working folk, mums and dads who have a real terms pay cut.
No, and there's no doubt about that on an individual basis, but haven't the government got a point fundamentally that if literally everyone gets a pay rise, we could get into an inflation spiral that simply could make things so much worse?
Well, I think that is literally an academic point, and it was one made by the Governor of Bank of England a couple of weeks ago. If you're an employee and you've got 2 kids to feed, inflation is at 10%, you've been offered 3%, would you go to your boss and say, please, Gov, don't give me a pay rise this year, I'm worried about the macroeconomics? Of course no one would do that.
But the government's not there. But the whole point is the government has to look at the bigger picture. They have to look at the macroeconomic picture. Yes. And what I'm saying is they've got a point, haven't they?
I think there is a point to be said that there is a cost of living crisis. But my point is that cost of living crises don't come out of nowhere. They come out of government failure on infrastructure, whether that's investing in transport network to have cheaper fares. Theresa May cut the reserves of gas storage, so energy price goes up. We've got an energy cap system that is not working. Now we're getting 2 rises a year, it could go to 4, and so on and so on. Yeah. So actually, if the government had been elected yesterday, maybe they wouldn't be to blame. But after 12 years of not investing in British infrastructure, sadly, this is why, along with the tragedy in Ukraine, that there is a cost of living crisis.
OK, Peter, as always, really appreciate your time and thoughts this afternoon. Thank you, Peter Edwards there, former editor of Labour List. You're watching GB News. Get in touch, by the way, gbviews@gbnews.uk. I'm sure you got pretty strong opinions on all of this. Coming up in the next 30 minutes, we're speaking to Conservative MP Tom Hunt, hearing from the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, as well. But first, just after 3:30, here's the latest news.
Hello, good afternoon. It's 3:34. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. Crisis talks were held during a cabinet meeting this morning as the worst rail strikes in more than 3 decades caused major travel chaos across the UK. With 80% of train services cancelled, Boris Johnson warned commuters they must stay the course in the face of what he's calling unnecessary aggravation. More walkouts are planned for Thursday and Saturday, but the knock-on effects will be felt all week. It's after last-minute talks failed to resolve a dispute between unions and rail bosses over pay, jobs and conditions.
We need the union barons to sit down with Network Rail and the train companies and get on with it. And we need, I'm afraid, everybody, and I say this to the country as a whole, we need to get ready to stay the course.
RMT General Secretary Mick Lynch says members will overcome whatever obstacles the government puts in their way.
This is a lawful dispute under the legislation that the Tories brought in themselves. And every time we meet the hurdles and break the thresholds that they brought in, they want to change the law again. We've got the most draconian laws in Western Europe and in any democracy, in fact, anti-trade union laws. Whatever they bring in, we'll meet that challenge and we'll continue to campaign. And if necessary, we'll take effective industrial action when we need to.
In other news, a man who murdered Stephen and Jennifer Chappell in their home while their children slept upstairs has been jailed for life with a minimum term of 38 years. Colin Reeves, who served in Afghanistan, launched the attack in Norton Fitzwarren near Taunton last November. It followed a long-running dispute over parking. TV, online and DAB Plus radio. This is GB News. Back to the briefing with Darren in just a moment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Very welcome back. It is 22 minutes to 4 o'clock on this Tuesday afternoon. You're watching GB News, or indeed listening to us on TV, online, and on the wireless radio. Thank you very much indeed for your company. As I say, do get in touch, by the way. We're going to get some of your views a little later. Lots of people very animated about these rail strikes. GB Views at gbnews.uk, or indeed tweet us at GB News. Well, earlier, Gloria Di Piero, our esteemed colleague, was speaking to the former Transport Secretary, Justine Greening, on why, essentially, the Transport Secretary, the current one, Grant Shapps, is not intervening in this strike action, not trying to come up with a deal. And this is what she had to say.
Well, I do think the disruption is going to be very bad for lots of people, as we've seen. Government will end up needing to have a plan, because it's not just, by the sounds of it, going to be railway workers. We're seeing teachers talking about industrial action later in the year, even barristers. I've seen on social media people in the NHS saying, we wish we had the chance to be able to go on strike. You know, we want a pay rise too. So I think there's a broader discontentment around public sector workers. And I think the government is going to have a very clear strategy to deal with all of that over the coming period, because I think dealing with it piecemeal, even if Grant Shapps sat down with railway workers, is not going to fix that bigger challenge. And I think, let's be honest, there's millions of people in our country right now being disrupted by the strikes, but also there are millions of people really worried about how they're going to cope with the cost of living pressures in the months ahead. So fundamentally, I think the most important thing government can do is set out a really clear plan on how it's going to tackle inflation, because it's inflation that is driving the demands, I think, for some of these wage rises that we're seeing.
Justine Green speaking a little earlier. Well, we were also talking, of course, about this row within the Labour Party about whether to support strike action at all. So Keir Starmer demanded his front bench team don't join the picket lines today. Well, the Scottish Labour leader, Anna Sarwar, clearly didn't get that memo. He was spotted with RMT strikers outside a train station in Edinburgh a little bit earlier. And our reporter, David Donaldson, was there to see whether Labour's Scottish transport spokesperson, that's Neil Bibby, on why he, or whether he was or not, supporting the strikes. Let's have a listen.
I'm here firstly to show solidarity with rail workers who are taking this action, but also to listen to the concerns of RMT rail workers about the issues around a fair pay deal during a cost of living crisis, about the need to protect and defend jobs on our railways and to create a better future for our railways. These are real concerns that rail workers have. Nobody wants these strikes, not the public, not the unions, not businesses. So this really is a last resort, and I'm here to not only show solidarity with those rail workers about the concerns they've got, but to listen to those concerns. And that is one thing that Grant Shapps, the Transport Secretary, is not doing. He's not listening to what rail workers are saying. He's not even negotiating and meeting with the rail unions. And it's about time the Tories showed some leadership and fixed these Tory rail strikes.
I mean, one of the major concerns that the unions have is not just about money, it's about the actual safety of the rail network.
No, absolutely. I mean, clearly there's a cost of living crisis going on at the moment, and it's affecting everyone in the country, and the Tory government has completely failed to tackle that cost of living crisis. So it's no wonder that the unions are taking matters into their own hands to demand fair pay settlements for the workers, whether it's the railway workers or in other sectors as well. But clearly there are concerns about the job cuts that could happen in safety critical roles at Network Rail over the next few years, and actually if we want to have a better railway system for passengers as a whole, we need to invest in those railways, invest in those services, protect those jobs. So it's absolutely critical that we do ensure that those jobs are protected, so we have a better railway for everyone in Scotland and across the UK.
One of the major criticisms I'm hearing from passengers is the sheer volume of strikes. 3 in the space of 6 days. They say it's going to cause chaos.
Well, clearly there's going to be disruption to the railways. We're seeing actually in a number of sectors at the moment, we've seen cuts to bus services, we've seen cuts to train services, we've seen disruption at our airports, and we've seen disruption at our ferries. And really these are the issues that, as I say, Grant Shapps, the Transport Secretary, needs to get a grip of, as well as the Transport Minister here in Scotland, because there's a danger that Scotland and the UK is grinding to a halt, not just because of strikes, but because there's been a lack of investment and action to ensure that our transport sector is up to scratch.
And your message to the Prime Minister in terms of trying to get this sorted out?
Well, first of all, he should listen to the rail workers who are taking this action. He should take the threats of cuts to jobs off the table and cuts to services off the table, and ensure that we've got a better railway going forward into the future that protects jobs, protects services, and delivers a fair pay settlement for rail workers. But they take action to help the cost of living crisis, which is also driving this dispute, and ensure that we're delivering fair pay for workers right across the UK.
OK, let's go to Westminster now and speak to Conservative MP Tom Hunt, who is outside Parliament for us this afternoon. Tom, thank you very much indeed for joining us. We listened to a Labour spokesperson there calling these Conservative rail strikes. In many regards, they are, in the sense that, ultimately this is causing disruption to millions of people across the country. Isn't it up to the government to sort this out?
I don't think you can say they're, a union, quite a radical union, led by an individual who I believe has links to the Communist Party, makes a series of unreasonable demands which we don't meet, and therefore these are conservative strikes and we're to blame for that. That is absolutely not the case. I think the demands that they've been making have been unreasonable. We've actually had quotes from various people at the RMT saying they do not want to negotiate with a Conservative or Tory government, whatever they call it. So I think these are ultimately the responsibility of the RMT rail union, not held by the Labour Party.
In saying that, you say they're unreasonable. We've heard from them today. They're looking for a 7% pay rise. That's below, it must be said, quite a lot below the rate of inflation at the moment. Inflation is expected to get even higher. So in real terms, it is still a cut. And frankly, there's a cost of living crisis. It's not that surprising. Some people, some workers want to see higher pay at this time. Is it that unreasonable?
Let me be absolutely clear here. There's a fact, there's a reality. The median pay for rail workers is £44,000. For train drivers, it's £59,000. The majority of my constituents who would be most severely disrupted and negatively impacted by these strikes this week, more than likely will be on salaries far lower than both of those averages. Yes, there is a cost of living challenge caused by global inflationary pressures. Inflation higher than it's been for decades. I get that, I understand that. But ultimately, we don't want to make the situation worse by fueling a whole load of unsustainable increases in public sector pay across a number of different sectors. So, yes, by all means have a discussion and negotiation, but that isn't what the rail unions want. They've been determined to go down this route for a long time. For them, this is about politics, it's about their own political agenda. And I think that's a great shame, because there's going to be many of my constituents who are going to be paying for this through the chaos that we're going to see today, on Thursday, Saturday, and also Saturday the 2nd of July for my constituents.
In saying that, it's been reported today that the government are going to lift barriers on the pay of directors and non-executive directors in the City of London. If they were that concerned about pay inflation, why is the government allowing that to happen? It seems, yet again, and many people, there'll be many viewers saying, you earn a very decent salary, more than twice what a train driver does, and yet you're telling them to keep their pay down, that they say, frankly, it's all pretty unfair.
I think we've got to look at the situation as it is. We're talking about rail workers who have a median pay of £44,000, drivers and £59,000, going forward with a pay increase of 7% or 9%, which is what we're originally asking for. At this moment in time, I think would risk further fueling inflation. It would make a challenging situation even more challenging. Right, we've got to avoid these strikes. And why haven't the Labour Party clearly condemned them? We know the Labour Party are on receipt of hundreds of thousands of pounds from the rail unions, and instead of actually clearly condemning these strikes, we've actually got 16 Labour MPs part of those strikes. 3 Labour shadow ministers are striking, despite an order from Keir Starmer saying that they shouldn't. So frankly, these raises serious questions about the Labour Party. Keir Starmer's trying to say the Labour Party has changed. He's trying to say they're not in hoc to the far left anymore. Well, there's no evidence of that this week.
Just finally, Tom, though, how sustainable is the government's position if this genuinely turns into a summer of discontent, if we see teachers and nurses and barristers and God knows who else walk out? It's not going to be sustainable for the government to suggest, frankly, this has got nothing to do with us.
Well, if the rail union continue to behave in the way they've been, which has been Raquel Trent, it's been 100% unproductive. With regards to this specific issue, in the short term, I don't really know what the way forward is. And I think and we look at the government, but ultimately Network Rail, the rail operating companies, they've come out saying exactly the same thing. The rail unions as it stands have been completely unreasonable, and until they are more realistic about having a discussion about a sustainable way of addressing the cost of living in relation to their members, then it's going to be very difficult to move forward, sadly.
OK, Tom, as always, appreciate your time this afternoon. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Tom Hunt there, live outside Parliament, Conservative MP for Ipswich. Well, we've been talking about the train strikes across the UK today, but London's been particularly paralysed because most of the tube network is also out of action. In a moment, we'll be hearing from our national reporter, Paul Hawkins. But first, he spoke to the London Mayor, Sadiq Khan, and asked him whether the government was correct in claiming that Labour was effectively supporting these strikes.
This is classic deflection from Shapps, Sunak and Johnson. Look, Labour are not the government, right? So the Labour Party going on a picket line or not makes not a jot of difference on these strikes today. These strikes today are happening because the government are not willing to meet with the RMT nationally, but also are attaching a huge amount of conditions leading to cuts in London and across the country. So what the government's trying to do is deflect and blame Labour. It's a red herring. The key thing is for the RMT to sit down with the government, the train companies, Network Rail, and resolve differences around a table rather than strikes. Nobody wants strikes. I don't want strikes. Londoners don't want strikes. And I'm speaking to workers, they don't want strikes either.
Well, that was Sadiq Khan speaking to Paul Hawkins a little bit earlier, and delighted to say Paul is now joining us live from London Bridge. Paul, good afternoon to you. As we were saying, London kind of doubly hit today, not just affected by the national rail strike, but the fact that essentially the tube network, the underground network, is closed too.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's why it's really hit London hard. In fact, traffic levels at 11 o'clock this morning, this is according to the location services company TomTom, 13% higher than they were this time last week. 6 to 7% in Manchester, Liverpool and Cardiff, but much higher in London, and that's because, as you say, Darren, the capital hit by a tube strike and the national rail strike. Kind of similar-ish issues. The tube strike in London, based around the RMT and Unite both going on strike because TfL, Transport for London, want to introduce 600 job cuts, they say. They want to make it voluntary redundancies. They kind of lose those jobs once people retire. They've also been instructed by the government to review the, according to ministers anyway, generous pension scheme. And those are strings that come attached with that financial bailout that the government gave TfL so it could continue to operate over the pandemic. And in fact, that bailout runs out at the end of this week. So Sadiq Khan hoping to get another £900 million from the government at the end of this week. And he says that that's the reason why the tube is not working in London today. He's blaming the government. He says that it's deflection, the government blaming it on the unions and Labour, but at the same time, he's blaming it on the government themselves and kind of deflecting it and saying, look, the government's to blame, they're giving me this money, but they've got strings attached to it, and that's why we're having strikes in London.
OK, Paul, as always, appreciate your time. Hope you managed to get home all right this evening. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Paul Hawkins, there live at London Bridge. Lots of you been getting in touch. GBViews at GBnews.uk. Alan says, I live near Southend. Well, if you're in Southend today, you shouldn't be trying to leave the place. Jolly nice with the weather. He believes that Peter trains are running to schedule, but he says sack the rest of the strikers and recruit people who want to do the job. Michael says, everyone is hurting financially, but I have little empathy for the rail workers, or should I say those who earn reasonably good incomes. I have total empathy for those on lower paid jobs, especially those in the National Health Service. Evan says, government locked us down for 2 years with the lockdown scam. They shouldn't complain about the RMT now. And Timothy says, Labour MPs cover up the fact that they support open borders because it's not popular. Same here. At least 16 of them are openly supporting the strike, are being honest with us about where they stand. Meanwhile, the remaining 183 or not. Do get in touch, as always, gbviews at gbnews.uk. Colin Brazier is live in the studio for us this afternoon. He is, of course, on air just a couple of minutes' time. What do you make of the strikes, Colin?
Why does nobody have sympathy anymore for people? Why is it always empathy? I observe. I think there's a story we're missing at the moment, Darren. Maybe you've covered it. I don't think we have been covering it, not least enough, given the sums involved. Triple lock state pension.
Indeed.
Have you had a look at it?
Yes, it's going to be in place next year. Pensioners going to do a hell of a lot better than most of the rest of us.
As I'm sure you've explained already, they set the figure in September, and if that's, it's one of the three items, isn't it? It's pay growth, it's 2.5%, or it's inflation. And inflation, let's say it's 10% in September, that's going to mean an extra £10 billion that's got to be found through spending cuts or tax rises or borrowing will be on the hook for that year for an extra £10 billion. If you're a pensioner, if you're a state pensioner, well, that's 962 quid extra.
That's quite a lot.
A year. Wow.
Maybe it's not a surprise that the over 65s are the one demographic where the Conservative Party are still in the lead over Labour, according to the polls. That's going to cost an awful lot of money, and it reinforces, doesn't it, Colin? You've got kids. And I'm, this kind of sense that there is this generational divide, that old people have had it and continue to have it a lot better than some of the younger generations.
And you're borrowing off that future generation to pay for the pleasures of the current generation. The optics may not be great. I'm not sure about the intergenerational strife thing. We've been talking about it for 20 years. I don't think it leads to anything actual on the ground in terms of relations between the generations. Intergenerational justice, is this going to be affected by that? The sums are enormous, aren't they? £110 billion every year we pay on state pensions.
It's incredible.
Gigantic.
It's an awful lot of money, and it's going to go and higher as the population ages. But in the end, there'll be a lot of pensioners saying, we've got a fixed income.
Yeah. Inflation is eroding our savings.
Our fuel prices are going up too. And that we deserve this as much as anyone else does. But it doesn't build into the wage constraint that the government's been talking about.
It doesn't. Can I just talk a little bit about the rail strike?
You've got 15 seconds.
15 seconds to say, there's a big question for Keir Starmer. What is he going to do to those Labour MPs, one of whom has been pictured with Arthur Scargill of fond memory in Wakefield Day on the picket lines? What does he say to those people? It's not a question of who runs Britain. According to some people, who runs the Labour Party today?
Well, we will be seeing and listening and watching from 4 o'clock. Colin, thank you very much indeed. That is it from me for today. Of course, Gloria is back here at 12, Tom at 9:30. I'm going off with the Prime Minister for a little bit, so I'll be out and about around the world over the coming days. Thanks for watching this afternoon. I'll see you soon. I will leave you with the weather. And as I say, it's pretty darn good. See you soon.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. It's turned into a sunny day across southern parts of the UK with cloudier conditions further north. And aside from a few showers, most places are dry. That's because a very large anticyclone is sitting in the mid-Atlantic. It's blocking any considerable areas of low pressure or weather fronts from coming our way. But a weak front has introduced some cloud to Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England, 1 or 2 showers as well. However, even here the cloud will tend to thin and break overnight, especially for Northern England, southern and eastern Scotland, some clear spells developing. Further south, widely clear spells across the rest of England as well as Wales, but despite the clear skies, temperatures not dropping far. 13 or 14 Celsius in places. 11 for Stornoway, where it will be a damp and breezy start to the day on Wednesday, with thicker cloud affecting the north and northwest of Scotland once again, along with a keen breeze. But although it will be cloudy for Northern Ireland, the skies will brighten by the afternoon, and a much sunnier day for eastern Scotland, for much of northern England as well, and temperatures respond as a result up into the mid-20s here, whilst 26 to 28 is possible further south for much of central and southern England as well as South Wales. Now, through Wednesday evening, we'll see clear spells remain for the vast majority, but again, some thicker cloud for western and northern Scotland, some outbreaks of light rain and drizzle here. Northern Ireland also largely cloudy, but it's a warm night in places, a muggy night for some. 16 Celsius for Southampton, London, and I think mid-teens for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Now, for Scotland, once again, western areas seeing the cloud and those outbreaks of light rain during Thursday. But further south, plenty of sunshine before some heavy showers start to emerge in the far south by the afternoon. Showers develop more widely on Friday, along with much cooler air.
Join me, Gloria De Piero, Monday to Thursday at noon for The Briefing. We go to the parts of Parliament that you won't see elsewhere. Plus, there's exclusive interviews with MPs from all parties.
But quite often, they paper over the real truth. Why does a working class lad like you join the Tories?
That's a good question.
Don't miss it, Monday to Thursday.